The year is 1603, and England rests under a blanket of winter quietude. In the great palaces of the realm, fires crackle softly in massive stone hearths, their warm light dancing across tapestried walls that have witnessed decades of triumph and intrigue. The sound of burning logs settling into glowing embers creates a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, a comforting presence that has accompanied countless evenings of royal contemplation. Elizabeth Tudor, the woman who would become known as the Virgin Queen, had ruled England for 45 years by this time. Her reign, which historians would later call the Elizabethan Age, had been marked by unprecedented cultural flowering, maritime exploration, and political stability. Yet, as winter deepened in the early months of 1603, something had begun to change in the royal chambers of Richmond Palace. The fireplace in the Queen's private study burns with the same steady warmth it has provided for decades. Oak logs, carefully selected from the royal forests, release their sweet, woody fragrance into the air as they surrender to the flames. The crackling sounds create a gentle percussion that seems to measure time itself, each pop and hiss marking moments that slip away like smoke up the chimney. To understand the medical mystery surrounding Elizabeth's final days, we must first appreciate the world in which she lived and ruled. The England of 1603 was a place where medicine was still deeply rooted in ancient theories, where the balance of bodily humors was considered the key to health, and where royal physicians relied on methods that would seem foreign to modern understanding. The Queen's apartments at Richmond Palace were furnished with the finest comforts of the age. Heavy curtains of deep red velvet could be drawn against the winter cold, while Persian carpets softened the stone floors. The furniture, crafted by master woodworkers, included chairs upholstered in silk damask and tables inlaid with precious stones. Yet for all their luxury, these rooms carried an atmosphere of quietude that spoke of a life lived largely in solitude. Elizabeth had never married, a decision that had defined not only her personal existence, but the entire political landscape of Europe. She had transformed her unmarried state from what many considered a weakness into a source of power, using the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool while maintaining her independence as a ruler. Now, approaching her 70th year, she faced the ultimate solitude of mortality. The medical understanding of the time was based on the teachings of ancient Greek physicians, particularly Galen, whose theories about the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, dominated European medicine. According to this system, illness resulted from an imbalance among these humors, and treatment involved restoring harmony through various means, including bloodletting, purging, and the administration of herbal remedies. Royal physicians of the era were among the most learned men of their time, having studied at the great universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and sometimes continental institutions like Padua or Montpellier. They approached their calling with a combination of scholarly knowledge and practical experience, though their understanding of anatomy and physiology was limited by the restrictions placed on human dissection and the lack of instruments that could peer inside the living body. The Queen's daily routine in her final months followed patterns established over decades of royal life. She would rise early, often before dawn, and spend time in private prayer and contemplation. Her chambers would be warmed by fires that had been carefully tended throughout the night by loyal servants who moved through the palace corridors like shadows, ensuring their mistress's comfort without disturbing her rest. After her morning devotions, Elizabeth would typically review correspondence and state papers, her sharp mind still capable of grasping complex political situations despite her advancing age. She would meet with her closest advisors, men who had served her faithfully for years and who now watched with growing concern as subtle changes appeared in her demeanor and health. The palace kitchens would prepare her meals according to strict protocols, with dishes chosen not only for their palatability, but for their supposed medicinal properties. The royal physicians believed that food was medicine, and they carefully supervised the queen's diet, recommending certain combinations of ingredients to maintain the balance of her humors. As evening approached, Elizabeth would often retreat to her private chambers, where the fireplace provided both warmth and a focus for contemplation. The crackling flames would dance and flicker, casting moving shadows on the walls, while the queen sat in her favorite chair, perhaps reading from a beloved book of poetry, or simply watching the fire as her thoughts turned inward. The sounds of the palace would gradually quiet as night fell. Servants would complete their evening duties and retire to their quarters, leaving only the essential guards and attendants on duty. The great halls would echo with the soft footsteps of sentries making their rounds, while in the royal chambers, the fire would continue its gentle crackling, a constant companion through the long winter nights. In these quiet hours, Elizabeth might reflect on the extraordinary journey of her life. Born the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, she had survived a childhood marked by political upheaval and personal danger. Her mother had been executed when Elizabeth was barely 2 years old, and she had lived through the reigns of her half-brother Edward VI and half-sister Mary before ascending to the throne herself at the age of 25. The weight of crown and scepter had rested on her shoulders for nearly half a century, and she had borne that weight with a combination of intelligence, political acumen, and sheer determination that had earned her the admiration of her subjects and the respect of her enemies. She had navigated the treacherous waters of 16th century European politics, had seen off the threat of the Spanish Armada, and had presided over an age of unprecedented English achievement in literature, theater, and exploration. Yet now, as 1603 began, there were signs that even this remarkable woman was not immune to the passage of time. Court observers, always alert to any change in the Queen's condition, began to notice subtle alterations in her behavior and appearance. These changes would soon develop into the medical mystery that would surround her final months and continue to puzzle historians and physicians for centuries to come. The fire in her chamber continues to burn, its warm light illuminating the rich tapestries that tell stories of English history and mythology. The crackling of the logs provides a soothing soundtrack to our contemplation, a reminder that some things remain constant even as great lives draw toward their close. Each spark that rises from the flames carries with it something of the warmth and light that Elizabeth brought to her realm, a glow that would persist long after the embers had cooled. The crackling of the fireplace continues its gentle rhythm as we move deeper into the winter of 1603, when those closest to Queen Elizabeth began to notice the first subtle signs that something was amiss. The flames dance higher now, casting a warmer glow across the chamber as we contemplate the delicate observations of courtiers who had served their sovereign for decades. Robert Cecil, the Queen's principal secretary and one of her most trusted advisers, was among the first to observe changes in Elizabeth's demeanor. Cecil, a small, hunchbacked man whose physical limitations had never hindered his sharp political intelligence, had inherited his position from his father, William Cecil, Lord Burghley, who had served Elizabeth faithfully until his death in 1598. The younger Cecil possessed an intimate knowledge of the Queen's habits and temperament, making him uniquely qualified to detect even the most subtle alterations in her behavior. The winter fires in the palace required constant attention, and the servants responsible for maintaining them had developed an almost ritualistic approach to their duties. They would select only the finest seasoned oak and beech, logs that had been dried for at least 2 years, to ensure they would burn cleanly and provide steady heat. The wood would be arranged with careful precision, larger logs forming a foundation, while smaller pieces and kindling were positioned to encourage proper airflow. The result was a fire that could burn for hours with minimal attention, its crackling voice a constant presence in the royal chambers. Lady Catherine Howard, one of Elizabeth's ladies of the bedchamber, noticed that the Queen had begun to spend longer periods in silent contemplation, where once Elizabeth might have filled quiet moments with conversation or requests for music. She now seemed content to sit quietly before the fire, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames, as if she were reading messages in their movement. This contemplative mood was not entirely unusual for someone of the Queen's advanced years, but its frequency and intensity marked a departure from her typical patterns. The royal physicians, led by Dr. John Dee's successor in royal favor, began to keep more detailed records of the Queen's daily routine and physical condition. They noted that she continued to maintain her legendary appetite for work, reading state papers, and dictating correspondence with her usual attention to detail. Her intellectual faculties remained sharp, and she continued to demonstrate the quick wit and political acumen that had characterized her long reign. Yet there were subtle changes in her physical bearing that trained medical eyes could not ignore. Elizabeth's posture, once famously erect and commanding, had begun to show signs of the natural settling that comes with age. She moved with slightly less of the brisk energy that had once characterized her passage through the palace corridors, though she still refused assistance and insisted on maintaining her independence in all matters of personal mobility. Her sleep patterns, according to her chamber women, had become somewhat irregular, with periods of deep rest alternating with nights of apparent restlessness. The Queen's famous temper, which had been known to flare at perceived slights or incompetence, seemed to have mellowed considerably. Where once she might have delivered sharp rebukes to servants or courtiers who failed to meet her exacting standards, she now often simply indicated her displeasure with a look or a subtle gesture. This change was interpreted by some as a sign of growing wisdom, and by others as a possible indication of declining energy. Her eating habits, always carefully monitored by her physicians for their supposed humoral effects, remained relatively unchanged. Elizabeth continued to prefer simple, well prepared foods, avoiding the elaborate dishes that were fashionable at other European courts. She maintained her fondness for beer, which was considered healthier than water in an age when sanitation was poor, and she continued to enjoy moderate amounts of wine with her evening meals. The Queen's religious observances, always a matter of great interest to her subjects and foreign observers, remained consistent with the patterns she had established throughout her reign. She attended daily prayers and participated in the various ceremonies of the Church of England with the same combination of genuine devotion and political awareness that had characterized her approach to religious matters throughout her reign. Her private moments of prayer, conducted in the quiet of her chambers, with only the crackling fire as witness, seemed to provide her with comfort and strength. One of the most significant changes observed by the court was in Elizabeth's relationship with mirrors. The Queen, who had always been conscious of her appearance and had insisted on being surrounded by looking glasses that reflected her image from multiple angles, began to avoid her reflection. She would position herself in her chambers so that she faced away from the great mirrors that had once been constant companions, preferring instead to gaze into the fire or out through the windows at the winter landscape. This avoidance of mirrors was particularly noteworthy because Elizabeth had always understood the importance of appearance in maintaining royal authority. Throughout her reign, she had carefully controlled her public image, commissioning portraits that emphasized her majesty and power while concealing the natural effects of aging. Her elaborate makeup, wigs, and costumes had been tools of statecraft as much as personal vanity, and her withdrawal from constant self examination marked a significant psychological shift. The palace servants, with their intimate knowledge of royal routines, began to notice other subtle changes. The Queen's ladies reported that she spent longer periods preparing for bed each evening, not from increased vanity, but from what appeared to be a growing need for quiet reflection. She would sit before her dressing table, but instead of examining her appearance, she would often simply rest her hands on the polished wood surface and gaze into the distance. Her correspondence, while maintaining its usual political acuity, began to include more personal reflections and philosophical observations. Letters to trusted friends and advisers contained passages that spoke of the passage of time and the weight of responsibility in ways that were more introspective than had been typical of her earlier writing. These subtle changes in tone and content suggested a mind that was turning increasingly inward, contemplating not just the affairs of state, but the deeper questions of existence and legacy. The fire in her chamber burns lower now, the logs having settled into a bed of glowing coals that radiate steady warmth. The crackling has become softer, more intermittent, like the gentle breathing of a sleeping companion. This rhythm of fire and ember, flame and ash seems to mirror the natural cycles of life itself, the alternation between activity and rest, brightness and quiet contemplation. Court musicians, who had always been sensitive to the Queen's moods, began to adjust their repertoires to match her increasingly contemplative state. Where once they might have performed lively dances and celebratory pieces, they now more often chose gentle melodies and reflective compositions. The music would drift through the palace corridors like incense, creating an atmosphere of peaceful introspection that seemed to suit the queen's changing temperament. As winter deepened and the days grew shorter, these subtle changes became more pronounced. The court began to develop an almost protective atmosphere around their sovereign, with servants and courtiers moving more quietly through the palace halls and speaking in softer tones when in the queen's presence. This was not the result of any explicit instruction, but rather an intuitive response to the contemplative mood that seemed to emanate from the royal chambers. The fireplace continues its gentle crackling, each sound a small note in the larger symphony of time passing. The warmth it provides seems to create a cocoon of comfort around our contemplation, a safe space in which to consider the delicate observations of those who witnessed the beginning of Elizabeth's final chapter. In this warmth and quietude, we can begin to understand how a court that had known its sovereign for decades could sense, almost instinctively, that something fundamental was beginning to shift in the rhythm of royal life. The fireplace has settled into a steady rhythm now, its crackling more subdued as the logs burn down to glowing embers that pulse with warmth like a gentle heartbeat. In this comfortable glow, we turn our attention to the learned men who attended Queen Elizabeth's health, practitioners of an ancient art that blended scholarship with tradition, observation with theory, in ways that would seem both familiar and foreign to modern understanding. Dr. Rodrigo Lopez had been the Queen's personal physician until his execution in 1594 on charges of plotting to poison her, a fate that illustrated the dangerous intersection of medicine and politics in the Tudor court. His replacement, along with a small council of other royal physicians, approached their calling with a combination of university learning and practical experience that represented the pinnacle of medical knowledge in early 17th century England. These learned men had studied at the great universities of Europe, where they had mastered the texts of ancient authorities like Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicenna. Their understanding of human anatomy was based primarily on the dissection of animals and the occasional human cadaver, supplemented by detailed study of classical texts that had been preserved and transmitted through centuries of scholarly tradition. They could recite the properties of hundreds of medicinal plants, understood the supposed influence of celestial bodies on human health, and were skilled in the arts of diagnosis through observation of the patient's complexion, pulse, urine, and other visible signs. The royal physicians' chambers, located within the palace complex, were arranged to facilitate both their scholarly pursuits and their practical duties. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes containing the accumulated wisdom of centuries. These books, many of them handwritten manuscripts copied by generations of scribes, contained detailed discussions of medical theory, recipes for remedies, and observations of previous physicians. The fireplace in these chambers burned with the same steady warmth as those throughout the palace, providing light for reading and heat for preparing various medicinal compounds. When examining the queen, these physicians employed methods that had been refined over centuries of practice. They would begin by observing her general appearance, noting the color of her complexion, the brightness of her eyes, and the steadiness of her posture. They would feel her pulse at various points on her body, believing that different pulse points could reveal information about the condition of different organs. The examination of urine was considered particularly important, with physicians trained to detect subtle changes in color, clarity, and even taste that might indicate imbalances in the bodily humors. The theory of the four humors formed the foundation of their diagnostic approach. According to this ancient system, human health depended on the proper balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile within the body. Each humor was associated with specific qualities: blood with heat and moisture, phlegm with cold and moisture, yellow bile with heat and dryness, and black bile with cold and dryness. Disease was understood to result from an excess or deficiency of one or more humors, and treatment involved restoring the proper balance through various means. Bloodletting was one of the most common therapeutic interventions, based on the belief that many illnesses resulted from an excess of blood that needed to be drained from the body. The royal physicians possessed an array of instruments for this purpose, including lancets for making precise incisions and cupping glasses that could be heated and applied to the skin to draw blood to the surface. The amount of blood to be removed was calculated based on the patient's age, constitution, and the specific nature of their ailment. Purging, the induced evacuation of the bowels, was another standard treatment used to eliminate excess humors from the body. The physicians prepared various herbal compounds designed to produce this effect, carefully adjusting the strength and composition based on their assessment of the patient's condition. These remedies often included ingredients like rhubarb, senna, and other plants known for their purgative properties, combined with spices and other substances intended to moderate their action and improve their palatability. The royal apothecary, working closely with the physicians, maintained an extensive collection of medicinal substances. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the ceiling beams, filling the air with their concentrated fragrances. Glass containers held powdered minerals, ground animal parts, and exotic substances imported from distant lands. The preparation of remedies was considered both a science and an art, requiring precise knowledge of how different substances interacted and how their properties could be enhanced or modified through various methods of preparation. The influence of astrology on medical practice was considered not superstition, but sound science. The physicians carefully tracked the positions of the planets and stars, believing that celestial movements directly affected human health. Different parts of the body were thought to be governed by different astrological signs, and the timing of medical treatments was often adjusted to coincide with favorable planetary alignments. The phases of the moon were considered particularly important, with certain procedures believed to be more effective when performed during specific lunar phases. Diet played a crucial role in the physician's approach to maintaining the queen's health. They believed that different foods possessed specific humoral properties, and that the proper combination of ingredients could help maintain the balance necessary for good health. Hot and dry foods were recommended for patients with cold and moist constitutions, while cold and moist foods were prescribed for those with hot and dry temperaments. The royal kitchen worked closely with the physicians to ensure that the queen's meals supported her overall health according to these principles. The preparation of medicinal compounds often took place in the physician's chambers, where small fires could be maintained for heating and distillation. The crackling of burning wood provided a familiar background sound as the learned men ground herbs with mortars and pestles, mixed tinctures in glass vessels, and heated various substances in metal containers suspended over the flames. The process of creating medicine was as much ritual as science, with each step performed according to traditions that had been passed down through generations of practitioners. Sleep and rest were recognized as fundamental to health, and the royal physicians paid careful attention to the queen's sleeping patterns. They understood that the quality and quantity of sleep could affect the balance of the humors and recommended various measures to promote restful slumber. The temperature and humidity of the sleeping chamber were carefully controlled, with fires adjusted to provide optimal warmth without creating excessive dryness. Herbal sachets placed near the bed were believed to promote peaceful dreams, while certain foods were recommended or avoided based on their supposed effects on sleep quality. The physicians also recognized the importance of mental and emotional states in maintaining physical health. They understood that worry, anger, and other strong emotions could disrupt the natural balance of the humors and recommended various measures to promote mental tranquility. Music, pleasant aromas, and peaceful surroundings were all considered therapeutic, and the royal physicians worked with other members of the court to create an environment that would support the queen's overall well-being. Regular exercise, adapted to the patient's age and condition, was considered essential for maintaining the proper circulation of the humors throughout the body. For the queen, this might involve gentle walks through the palace gardens, dancing at court entertainments, or other forms of movement that could be incorporated into the daily routine without causing undue fatigue. The physicians believed that complete inactivity was as harmful as excessive exertion, and they sought to find the proper balance for each individual patient. The fireplace continues its gentle crackling, the sound now softer and more intermittent as the fire burns lower. The warm glow illuminates the imagined shelves of medical texts and bottles of remedies, creating an atmosphere of scholarly dedication and ancient wisdom. In this contemplative space, we can appreciate the sincere efforts of these learned men to understand and treat the ailments of their time, working with tools and theories that, while different from modern medicine, represented the accumulated knowledge and careful observation of centuries of practitioners. As we consider their methods and beliefs, we can begin to understand how they approached the subtle changes they observed in their royal patient during those winter months of 1603. Their careful attention to detail, their systematic approach to diagnosis and treatment, and their deep respect for the complexity of human health provided a framework for understanding what they were beginning to see in the Queen's condition, even as the true nature of her ailment remained mysterious and elusive. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals now, their red-orange warmth pulsing gently in the gathering dusk of our contemplation. Occasionally, a ember shifts or settles, sending up tiny sparks that dance briefly before disappearing into the darkness above. In this peaceful glow, we turn our attention to the various theories that the royal physicians developed as they attempted to understand the changes they observed in their sovereign during those final months. The concept of the king's evil, or scrofula, had long been associated with royal health, though not in the way one might expect. Rather than being an ailment that afflicted monarchs, scrofula was a condition that kings and queens were believed to cure through the royal touch. Elizabeth herself had performed this ceremony countless times throughout her reign, laying her hands upon subjects suffering from the disease and offering them specially minted gold coins known as touch pieces. The belief in the monarch's healing power was so strong that people would travel from across the kingdom for the opportunity to receive the royal touch. This belief in the sacred nature of royal blood and its healing properties created an interesting paradox when it came to treating the monarch's own ailments. If the royal touch could cure disease in others, what did it mean when the sovereign herself showed signs of illness? The physicians grappled with this theological and medical puzzle, developing theories that attempted to reconcile their observations with the established belief in divine royal authority. One theory that gained currency among the learned men was that the queen's condition might be related to what they termed the melancholy of greatness. This concept, derived from classical and medieval medical texts, suggested that individuals burdened with enormous responsibilities might develop an excess of black bile or melancholia, which could manifest in various physical and mental symptoms. The weight of ruling a kingdom for nearly half a century, they reasoned, might naturally lead to such an imbalance. The physicians noted that melancholy was often associated with intellectual brilliance and deep contemplation. Many of the greatest scholars, artists, and leaders throughout history had been described as melancholic temperaments, and the condition was sometimes viewed as the inevitable price of genius. In Elizabeth's case, her renowned intelligence and political acumen might predispose her to this particular humoral imbalance, especially as she entered the final phase of her life. Dr. William Harvey, though not yet the physician who would later describe the circulation of blood, was among the younger generation of medical men who brought fresh perspectives to royal health care. These physicians had been exposed to some of the new anatomical discoveries being made in continental Europe, though they still worked within the traditional framework of humoral medicine. They began to develop more sophisticated theories about the relationship between the heart, blood, and overall health. The concept of noble blood took on medical as well as social significance in their thinking. Royal blood was believed to be literally different from that of common people, refined through generations of noble breeding to possess special qualities. This theory suggested that royal ailments might manifest differently than similar conditions in ordinary subjects, requiring specialized understanding and treatment approaches that took into account the unique nature of monarchical physiology. Environmental factors were given considerable attention in the physicians' theories. The winter of 1602-1603 had been particularly harsh, with extended periods of cold and limited sunlight. The ancient medical texts spoke extensively about the relationship between climate and health, and the royal physicians theorized that the prolonged exposure to winter conditions might have contributed to an accumulation of cold and moist humors in the Queen's system. The palace environment itself became a subject of medical scrutiny. Despite the constant fires and careful attention to comfort, the stone walls and high ceilings of royal residences could create drafts and temperature variations that might affect the delicate balance of the humors. The physicians recommended various modifications to the Queen's living spaces, including the installation of additional tapestries to reduce drafts and the strategic placement of braziers to create more consistent warmth. Age related theories formed another significant category of medical thinking about the Queen's condition. The physicians understood that the natural aging process involved a gradual cooling and drying of the body's constitution as the heat and moisture of youth slowly diminished over time. This process was considered inevitable and natural, but it could be accelerated or complicated by various factors, including stress, climate, and constitutional predisposition. The concept of critical periods in human life played an important role in their understanding. Ancient medical texts described certain ages as particularly significant for health changes, with the 63rd and 69th years being considered especially critical for individuals of melancholic temperament. Elizabeth, approaching her 70th year, was entering what the physicians recognized as a naturally vulnerable period of life. Dietary theories occupied much of the physicians' attention as they sought to understand and address the Queen's condition. They carefully analyzed her eating habits, looking for clues about possible humoral imbalances. The royal kitchen began preparing special dishes designed to warm and dry her constitution, including broths made from heating spices, meats that were considered naturally warm, and wines that had been infused with medicinal herbs. The influence of celestial bodies on the Queen's health became a subject of intense study and debate among the court astronomers and physicians. Detailed charts were prepared showing the positions of the planets at significant moments in Elizabeth's life, and correlations were sought between astronomical events and changes in her health. The physicians noted that certain planetary alignments had coincided with previous periods of royal illness, and they used this information to predict times when the Queen might be particularly vulnerable to health problems. Sleep disturbances, which had been noted by the Queen's attendants, were interpreted through the lens of humoral theory as possible evidence of an excess of hot humors that prevented natural rest. The physicians recommended various remedies, including herbal preparations designed to cool and calm the system, adjustments to the temperature and humidity of the sleeping chamber, and changes in evening routines to promote more restful slumber. The theory of sympathetic correspondence suggested that the health of the monarch was mystically connected to the well being of the realm. Some physicians and courtiers began to look for correlations between the Queen's condition and various events in the kingdom, wondering whether political tensions, economic difficulties, or other national problems might be manifesting in their sovereign's health. This theory, while perhaps seeming fanciful to modern understanding, was taken seriously by many learned men of the time. Emotional and spiritual factors were increasingly incorporated into medical theories about the Queen's condition. The physicians recognized that her lifelong commitment to celibacy and her dedication to her role as England's sovereign had required enormous personal sacrifice. They theorized that the accumulated emotional and spiritual weight of these choices might be manifesting in physical symptoms as her life entered its final phase. The fire continues to pulse gently in its bed of coals, occasionally sending up small flames as a pocket of gas escapes from the burning wood. The warmth it provides seems to create a cocoon of comfort around our contemplation, a space where the careful theories and observations of these long ago physicians can be considered with the respect they deserve. Their efforts to understand human health and disease, while based on theories that modern science has superseded, represented genuine attempts to relieve suffering and preserve life using the best knowledge available to them. As we reflect on their various theories about the Queen's condition, we can appreciate both the limitations and the insights of their approach, their careful attention to environmental factors, their recognition of the importance of emotional and spiritual well being, and their systematic approach to observation and treatment contained elements of wisdom that remain relevant today, even as the specific theories they employed have been replaced by more accurate understanding of human physiology and disease. The coals in the fireplace glow with a deeper warmth now, their red orange light creating shifting patterns of brightness and shadow on the walls of our contemplative space. An occasional, gentle crackling breaks the silence as the remaining wood settles deeper into the embrace of the flames. In this peaceful atmosphere, we turn our attention to the deepening mystery of Elizabeth's final months, examining the various pieces of evidence that her contemporaries observed and recorded. Contemporary accounts from the winter and spring of 1603 paint a picture of subtle but significant changes in the Queen's behavior and appearance. Sir Robert Carey, who would later carry news of Elizabeth's death to James VI of Scotland, noted in his memoirs that the Queen seemed to be withdrawing from many of the public ceremonies and social interactions that had previously energized her. She still attended to affairs of state with her characteristic attention to detail, but she showed less interest in the elaborate entertainments and courtly rituals that had once been sources of pleasure and political theater. The Venetian ambassador, Giovanni Carlo Scaramelli, provided one of the most detailed contemporary accounts of the Queen's appearance during this period. Writing to the Doge and Senate of Venice, he described Elizabeth as still maintaining her regal bearing, but noted that she had become noticeably thinner and seemed to require more effort to maintain the energy and presence that had always been hallmarks of her public appearances. His diplomatic training made him particularly observant of such details, as they might signal important political implications for European relations. Lady Catherine Howard, who had served as one of Elizabeth's ladies of the bedchamber for over a decade, kept detailed notes about the Queen's daily routines and habits. These private records, discovered years later in family archives, provide invaluable insights into the intimate details of royal life during these final months. Lady Catherine noted that the Queen had begun to spend longer periods sitting quietly by her fire, sometimes for hours at a time, gazing into the flames as if seeking answers to unspoken questions. The Queen's eating habits, always carefully monitored by her physicians and servants, showed subtle but consistent changes during this period. While she maintained her appetite and continued to enjoy her meals, she began to show preferences for simpler, more easily digestible foods. The elaborate dishes that had once graced the royal table were gradually replaced by broths, soft breads, and other foods that required less chewing and were believed to be easier on the digestive system. Sleep patterns became a particular concern for those attending the Queen. Her chamberwomen reported that she often experienced difficulty falling asleep, lying awake for extended periods while staring at the ceiling or watching the play of firelight on the walls of her chamber. When she did sleep, it was often fitful, marked by periods of restlessness that would wake her attendants. Yet she consistently refused any suggestions that she might benefit from sleeping draughts or other medicinal aids to rest. The Queen's famous temper, which had been both feared and respected throughout her reign, underwent a notable transformation during these months. Where once she might have responded to frustrations or disappointments with sharp words or dramatic gestures, she now seemed more likely to withdraw into contemplative silence. This change was particularly noticeable to her long serving advisors, who had learned to read her moods and anticipate her reactions over decades of close association. Physical symptoms became more apparent as winter turned to spring. The Queen, who had always prided herself on her erect posture and commanding presence, began to show signs of what her physicians termed a settling of the frame. She moved more slowly and seemed to require more effort to maintain the physical bearing that had always been part of her royal image. Yet she continued to refuse assistance with walking or other activities, maintaining her independence with characteristic determination. Court observers noted changes in the Queen's voice during this period. While she continued to speak with clarity and authority when addressing matters of state, her voice seemed to have lost some of its former resonance and power. She spoke more softly in private conversations and appeared to tire more easily during extended discussions or meetings with advisors. The Queen's relationship with her own reflection, always a complex aspect of her carefully maintained public image, underwent significant changes during these months. She had always been acutely aware of her appearance and had used clothing, makeup, and jewelry as tools of statecraft. Now, she seemed less interested in these elaborate preparations, often choosing simpler dress and spending less time with her various mirrors and looking glasses. Changes in her handwriting provided another source of concern for those who worked closely with her. The Queen's secretaries noted that her once bold and decisive script had become somewhat less firm, though it remained perfectly legible, and her thoughts continued to be expressed with characteristic intelligence and wit. The physical act of writing seemed to require more concentration and effort, though the quality of her thinking remained undiminished. Religious observances, which had always been an important part of Elizabeth's daily routine, took on increased significance during this period. She spent longer periods in private prayer and seemed to find particular comfort in reading from her prayer book and Bible. Her chaplains noted that she often requested specific psalms or biblical passages that dealt with themes of comfort, rest, and divine protection. The Queen's interest in music, which had been a lifelong passion, underwent subtle changes during these months. While she continued to enjoy performances by court musicians, she showed increasing preference for gentler, more contemplative pieces. The lively dances and martial music that had once entertained her were gradually replaced by softer melodies and more meditative compositions. Weather seemed to affect the queen more noticeably than it had in previous years. Cold, damp days appeared to contribute to her preference for remaining indoors, and she often positioned herself closer to fires or requested additional warming. Her servants began to anticipate these needs, ensuring that chambers were warmed well in advance of her arrival, and that braziers were available to provide additional heat when needed. The Queen's correspondence, while maintaining its political acuity and literary quality, began to include more personal reflections and philosophical observations. Letters to trusted friends and advisers contained passages that spoke of time's passage and the weight of responsibility in more introspective terms than had been typical of her earlier writing. These subtle changes in tone suggested a mind that was turning increasingly inward, contemplating deeper questions of existence and legacy. Her memory, which had always been one of her greatest assets as a ruler, remained sharp and detailed. She could still recall complex political situations from decades past and continued to demonstrate the quick wit and strategic thinking that had characterized her reign. However, those closest to her noticed that she sometimes seemed to take longer to retrieve certain information, as if accessing memories required slightly more effort than it once had. The Queen's famous collection of jewelry and precious objects, which had always been important symbols of royal power and personal taste, began to receive less of her attention. Where once she might have spent considerable time selecting accessories for public appearances, she now often chose simpler pieces or allowed her ladies in waiting to make these decisions. This represented a significant shift for someone who had always understood the political importance of visual presentation. Social interactions with courtiers and visitors became more focused and purposeful during this period. The Queen continued to fulfill her obligations to receive foreign ambassadors and meet with important subjects, but these encounters were often shorter and more formally structured than they had been in the past. She seemed to conserve her energy for the most important interactions while reducing time spent on purely social conversations. The fire in our contemplative space continues to glow warmly, its coals pulsing gently with residual heat, while occasional small flames dance upward as gases escape from the burning wood. This peaceful rhythm provides a perfect backdrop for considering the careful observations of those who witnessed these subtle changes in their sovereign's condition. Medical examinations during this period were necessarily limited by the customs and technologies of the time. The royal physicians could observe external symptoms and listen to the Queen's own descriptions of how she felt, but they had no way to peer inside the body or conduct the detailed tests that modern medicine would consider routine. They relied on their trained senses and their understanding of traditional medical theory to interpret the evidence they could gather. The physicians noted that the Queen's pulse, while remaining steady, seemed to require slightly more effort to detect at certain points on her body. Her complexion, always carefully maintained through cosmetics and lighting, appeared to require more artificial enhancement to achieve the luminous appearance that had been part of her public image. Her breathing remained clear and unobstructed, but occasionally seemed to require more conscious effort during extended speaking or physical activity. Contemporary medical understanding would have interpreted many of these symptoms as natural consequences of aging, particularly in someone who had lived as long and borne as much responsibility as Elizabeth had. The physicians understood that the body's natural heat and moisture diminished with age, leading to the kind of changes they were observing. However, they also recognized that their royal patient was experiencing these changes in a more concentrated time frame than might be considered entirely normal. The theory of constitutional predisposition played an important role in how the physicians interpreted the evidence they were gathering. Elizabeth had always been classified as having a melancholic temperament, characterized by intelligence, introspection, and a tendency toward seriousness. The physicians theorized that individuals with this constitutional type might be more susceptible to certain kinds of age related changes, particularly those affecting mental and emotional equilibrium. Dietary interventions became more systematic during this period as the physicians attempted to address what they perceived as developing humoral imbalances. The royal kitchen began preparing special dishes designed to provide warming and drying effects, including broths enriched with spices like ginger and cinnamon, meats that were considered naturally heating, and wines that had been infused with medicinal herbs. The Queen's response to these various interventions was carefully monitored and recorded. She generally cooperated with her physician's recommendations, though she maintained her characteristic independence and continued to make her own decisions about which treatments to accept and which to decline. Her intelligence and education made her an active participant in discussions about her health, and she often asked detailed questions about the reasoning behind various recommendations. Environmental modifications to the royal chambers became more elaborate as the physicians sought to create optimal conditions for their patients' health and comfort. Additional tapestries were hung to reduce drafts, braziers were positioned to provide more consistent heating, and special attention was paid to the quality of air circulation. The fires in the Queen's chambers were tended more frequently and with greater care to ensure consistent warmth and comfort. The crackling of our contemplative fire continues its gentle rhythm, each sound a small note in the larger symphony of time and observation. The warmth it provides creates a cocoon of comfort around our consideration of these careful medical observations, allowing us to appreciate the sincere efforts of those who sought to understand and address their sovereign's changing condition. As we reflect on this accumulating evidence, we can begin to understand how the mystery of Elizabeth's final months developed. The symptoms and changes observed by her contemporaries were real and significant, yet they remained puzzling within the medical framework available at the time. The careful attention paid to every detail of her condition reflects both the importance of royal health to the stability of the realm and the genuine concern felt by those who had served her faithfully for so many years. The fire has settled into its most peaceful phase now, the coals glowing with steady warmth, while only occasional soft sounds mark the settling of ash and ember. This gentle rhythm creates an atmosphere of deep contemplation as we bridge the centuries between Elizabeth's time and our own, considering how modern medical knowledge might illuminate the mystery that puzzled her contemporary physicians. Modern historians and medical professionals who have studied the available evidence about Elizabeth's final months have developed several theories about what might have caused the changes observed by her contemporaries. These theories benefit from 4 centuries of advances in medical understanding, including detailed knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and the disease processes that affect the human body as it ages. One of the most frequently discussed possibilities among modern medical historians is that Elizabeth may have been suffering from what we now recognize as ovarian or uterine cancer. The symptoms described by contemporary observers, gradual weight loss, changes in energy levels, and eventual loss of appetite, could be consistent with a slowly developing malignancy of the reproductive system. Such cancers were completely undetectable by the medical methods available in 1603, and they could progress for months or even years before becoming fatal. The theory of reproductive cancer gains some support from what we know about Elizabeth's lifelong celibacy and her decision never to bear children. Modern medicine has established that women who never become pregnant have slightly higher risks of developing certain reproductive cancers, possibly due to the continuous cycles of ovulation throughout their reproductive years. However, it's important to note that this is merely a statistical correlation, and many women who never have children live long, healthy lives without developing any such conditions. Another possibility that modern physicians have considered is some form of cardiac condition, possibly involving the gradual failure of the heart's ability to pump blood efficiently throughout the body. The symptoms described by contemporary observers, fatigue, changes in complexion, and gradual weakening, could be consistent with what we now call congestive heart failure. Such conditions were completely beyond the understanding of 16th century medicine, though physicians of the time did recognize the heart as a vital organ whose proper function was essential to health. Modern understanding of cardiovascular disease suggests that the stresses of Elizabeth's long reign, combined with the dietary habits and lifestyle factors of her time, could have contributed to the development of heart problems. The constant pressure of ruling a kingdom, the emotional stress of remaining unmarried and childless, and the limited medical care available for preventive health maintenance could all have played roles in the development of cardiac issues. Some medical historians have suggested that Elizabeth might have suffered from what we now recognize as diabetes, a condition that was completely unknown to physicians of her time. The gradual onset of symptoms, the changes in energy levels, and the eventual development of more serious complications could all be consistent with the progression of this metabolic disease. However, the available historical evidence doesn't provide enough specific information about symptoms like excessive thirst or urination that would make this diagnosis more certain. The possibility of kidney disease has also been considered by modern medical historians. Chronic kidney conditions can develop slowly over many years, gradually affecting the body's ability to filter waste products from the blood and maintain proper fluid balance. Such conditions could explain many of the symptoms observed in Elizabeth's final months, including fatigue, changes in complexion, and eventual appetite loss. Modern geriatric medicine recognizes that aging itself can bring about subtle but significant changes in physical and mental function, even in the absence of any specific disease process. Elizabeth at nearly 70 years of age, was extraordinarily old by the standards of her time, when life expectancy was much lower than it is today. The changes observed by her contemporaries might simply have represented the natural aging process, accelerated by the stresses and responsibilities of her extraordinary life. The role of depression and anxiety in physical health is much better understood today than it was in Elizabeth's time. Modern medicine recognizes that severe emotional stress can have profound effects on physical health, suppressing immune function, affecting cardiovascular health, and contributing to a wide range of other medical problems. The psychological burden of ruling alone for nearly half a century, combined with the personal sacrifices Elizabeth had made for her role as queen, could have contributed significantly to physical health problems. Nutritional deficiencies, while less likely in someone with access to the royal kitchens, remain a possibility that modern medical historians have considered. The limited understanding of nutrition in Elizabeth's time meant that even wealthy individuals might not have received optimal nourishment. Deficiencies in vitamins or minerals could have contributed to some of the symptoms observed during her final months. The fireplace continues its gentle warmth, the coals now glowing with a deep red color that speaks of long, slow burning. The occasional small flame that dances upward reminds us that even in the quiet phases of combustion, energy continues to flow and transform. This peaceful rhythm provides a perfect backdrop for contemplating the intersection of historical evidence and modern medical understanding. Modern toxicology has also considered the possibility that Elizabeth might have been suffering from some form of chronic poisoning. Though this theory lacks strong supporting evidence, the cosmetics and medications available in her time contained various substances that we now know to be harmful, including lead-based face paints and mercury-containing remedies. Long-term exposure to such substances could theoretically have contributed to health problems, though the symptoms described by contemporary observers don't clearly point to any specific type of poisoning. The stress-related theory gains considerable support from modern understanding of how chronic stress affects the body. Elizabeth's position required her to make life and death decisions regularly, to navigate complex political situations with potentially catastrophic consequences, and to maintain her authority in a world where female rulers were viewed with suspicion and hostility. The physiological effects of such sustained stress are now well understood and could easily have contributed to the development of various health problems. Modern psychiatry would also recognize the possibility that Elizabeth was experiencing what we might now call anticipatory grief or existential anxiety as she contemplated the end of her life and reign. The psychological impact of facing one's own mortality, particularly for someone who had devoted their entire existence to a role that would necessarily end with their death, could have profound effects on both mental and physical well-being. The autoimmune theory represents another modern perspective on Elizabeth's possible condition. Autoimmune diseases, in which the body's immune system mistakenly attacks its own tissues, can develop slowly over time and produce a wide range of symptoms that might match those observed in the Queen's final months. Such conditions were completely unknown to 16th century medicine, though some of their effects might have been attributed to humoral imbalances or other theoretical frameworks. Hormonal changes associated with menopause and postmenopausal aging could also have played a role in the symptoms observed by Elizabeth's contemporaries. Modern medicine understands that the dramatic hormonal shifts that occur during and after menopause can affect virtually every system in the body, potentially contributing to changes in energy levels, mood, physical appearance, and overall health. The fire's warmth continues to enfold our contemplation, creating a sense of timeless connection between the careful observations of Elizabeth's contemporary physicians and the analytical tools available to modern medical science. While we may never know with certainty what caused the changes observed in the Queen's final months, the application of modern medical knowledge to historical evidence provides valuable insights into the possible explanations for this enduring mystery. As we consider these various modern theories, we can appreciate both the advances that medical science has made over the past 4 centuries and the fundamental continuity of human experience across time. The careful attention that Elizabeth's physicians paid to her condition, their systematic approach to observation and treatment, and their genuine concern for her well being represent the same fundamental medical impulses that drive healthcare providers today. Even though our understanding and tools have evolved dramatically, the coals in our fireplace have reached their deepest glow now, radiating steady warmth with only the softest sounds as the last fragments of wood settle into ash. The light they cast is gentle and contemplative, perfect for considering the final chapter of Elizabeth's remarkable life. As March 1603 unfolded with its mixture of hope for spring and the weight of approaching endings, the court had moved to Richmond Palace for what would prove to be the final time in Elizabeth's reign. Richmond held special significance for the Queen, as it had been a favorite residence throughout her life, and the palace's relatively intimate scale provided a more comfortable environment than the grander but more formal settings of Windsor or Westminster. The chambers at Richmond were more easily heated, the corridors shorter and more easily navigated, and the overall atmosphere more conducive to the quiet contemplation that had become increasingly important to the aging monarch. March arrived with the first tentative signs of spring, though the weather remained cool and changeable. The royal physicians noted that the Queen seemed to derive some pleasure from observing the gradual lengthening of days and the earliest hints of green appearing in the palace gardens. She often positioned herself near windows where she could watch the play of light and shadow as clouds moved across the sky, finding in these natural rhythms a source of comfort and reflection. The Queen's daily routines during these final weeks took on a more simplified and contemplative character. She continued to attend to essential matters of state, but many of the ceremonial obligations and social interactions that had once filled her days were quietly set aside. Her advisors, recognizing the changes in her condition, worked to shield her from unnecessary demands while ensuring that the most important affairs of the kingdom continued to receive her attention. Sleep, which had become increasingly elusive during the winter months, remained a challenge for Elizabeth throughout March. Her chamberwomen reported that she often lay awake for long periods, sometimes sitting up in bed to gaze at the dying embers in her fireplace or to look out at the night sky through her chamber windows. When she did sleep, it was often brief and restless, though she seemed to find some comfort in the familiar sounds of the palace settling around her as night deepened. The queen's appetite, while diminished from its former levels, remained sufficient to sustain her, and she continued to take pleasure in certain foods. Her physicians and kitchen staff worked together to prepare dishes that would be both appealing and nourishing, often focusing on broths, soft breads, and other foods that required minimal effort to consume. Wine, which had always been part of her daily routine, remained a source of comfort and was carefully selected for its quality and supposed medicinal properties. Religious observances took on increased importance during these final weeks. Elizabeth spent longer periods in private prayer and seemed to find particular solace in reading from her prayer book and Bible. Her chaplains noted that she often requested specific psalms or biblical passages that dealt with themes of comfort, divine protection, and preparation for the life to come. These spiritual practices seemed to provide her with a sense of peace and purpose that helped sustain her through the physical challenges she was experiencing. The courtiers and servants who attended the queen during this period developed an almost protective atmosphere around her, moving more quietly through the palace halls and speaking in softer tones when in her presence. This was not the result of any explicit instruction, but rather an intuitive response to the contemplative and fragile quality that seemed to surround their sovereign. The usual bustle and energy of court life gradually gave way to a more subdued and respectful rhythm. Lady Catherine Howard and the other ladies of the bedchamber maintained careful watch over the Queen's condition, noting every change and communicating regularly with the royal physicians. They observed that Elizabeth seemed to require more assistance with certain daily activities, though she continued to insist on maintaining as much independence as possible. Her famous pride and determination remained intact, even as her physical strength gradually diminished. The Queen's correspondence during these final weeks took on an increasingly personal and reflective character. Letters to trusted friends and advisors contained passages that spoke of gratitude for years of faithful service, reflections on the achievements of her reign, and quiet acceptance of life's natural progression. Her handwriting, while remaining legible, showed the effects of her weakening condition, requiring more effort and concentration to produce. Music continued to provide comfort for the Queen during these final weeks, though her preferences had shifted toward gentler and more contemplative pieces. Court musicians, sensitive to her changing tastes, prepared programs of soft instrumental music and gentle vocal pieces that could provide a peaceful background to her daily activities without demanding active attention or response. The fires in the Queen's chambers were tended with even greater care during this period, as warmth and comfort became increasingly important to her well-being. The servants responsible for maintaining these fires developed an almost ritualistic approach to their duties, ensuring that the flames burned steadily and cleanly throughout the day and night. The crackling of burning wood became a constant, comforting presence in the royal apartments. As March progressed, the royal physicians noted subtle but significant changes in the Queen's condition. She seemed to tire more easily and required longer periods of rest between activities. Her voice, while maintaining its clarity and authority when needed, became softer and required more effort to project. These changes were monitored carefully and discussed in hushed conferences amongst the medical staff. The Queen's relationship with her physical appearance underwent further changes during these final weeks. She continued to allow her ladies to dress her with care and attention, but she showed less interest in the elaborate preparations that had once been part of her daily routine. Mirrors, which had once been constant companions, were often positioned so that she could avoid seeing her reflection unless she specifically chose to do so. Weather seemed to affect the Queen more noticeably during this period, with cold or damp days leading to increased time spent close to fires and a preference for remaining in her warmest chambers. The palace staff began to anticipate these needs, ensuring that rooms were properly heated before her arrival and that additional warmth was available when needed. The Queen's memory remained sharp and detailed throughout these final weeks, though those closest to her noticed that she sometimes seemed to require more time to organize her thoughts or retrieve specific information. Her intelligence and political acumen remained intact, and she continued to demonstrate the quick wit and strategic thinking that had characterized her reign, though these mental efforts seemed to require more energy than they once had. Social interactions became more precious and carefully managed during this period. The Queen continued to receive important visitors and attend to essential state business, but these encounters were often shorter and more focused than they had been in the past. She seemed to conserve her energy for the most meaningful interactions while allowing others to handle routine matters that could be delegated. The fire in our contemplative space continues to glow with gentle warmth, its coals now deep red and steady, providing comfort without drama or disturbance. This peaceful presence mirrors the quiet dignity with which Elizabeth approached these final weeks of her extraordinary life, facing the inevitable with the same courage and grace that had characterized her long reign. As we consider this final chapter of her story, we can appreciate the very human qualities that persisted beneath the royal majesty: the search for comfort and meaning, the appreciation of simple pleasures like warmth and music, and the desire for peace and spiritual preparation as life drew toward its close. In these universal experiences, the great Queen revealed herself to be ultimately a mortal woman facing the same fundamental challenges that confront all human beings at the end of their earthly journey. Our fire has entered its most serene phase now, the coals glowing with deep, steady warmth that requires no tending, no adjustment, only quiet appreciation. The light is soft and golden, creating an atmosphere of profound peace as we accompany Elizabeth through her final days. When the burdens of earthly rule began to give way to a deeper, more spiritual preparation for the journey that awaits all souls, the last days of March 1603 at Richmond Palace took on an almost sacred quality, as if time itself had slowed to allow for proper recognition of the momentous transition that was approaching. The Queen, with the wisdom that comes from 7 decades of life and nearly half a century of rule, seemed to understand intuitively that her earthly responsibilities were drawing to their close, and she began to prepare herself and her realm for the change that was to come. Sleep, which had become increasingly elusive throughout the winter months, paradoxically became both more difficult and more profound during these final days. The queen would often rest in her chair by the fire rather than retiring to her bed, finding comfort in the gentle warmth and the hypnotic dance of flames and embers. When she did sleep, it was with the deep stillness of someone who had made peace with both her accomplishments and her mortality. The royal physicians, recognizing that their traditional remedies could offer only limited comfort at this stage, focused their efforts on ensuring the queen's physical ease and spiritual preparation. They continued to monitor her condition carefully, but their interventions became gentler and more supportive rather than curative. The goal was no longer to restore her to full health, but to ease her passage and ensure her dignity throughout the process. Dr. John Whitgift, the Archbishop of Canterbury, became a more frequent presence in the royal chambers during these final days. His visits were not formal state occasions, but quiet, personal meetings focused on spiritual comfort and preparation. The Queen, who had always taken her religious responsibilities seriously, found peace in these conversations about faith, forgiveness, and the hope of eternal life. The court gradually took on the hushed atmosphere of a cathedral, with servants and courtiers moving through the palace corridors with reverent quietness. Conversations were conducted in whispers, and the usual sounds of palace life, footsteps, closing doors, the clink of dishes, were muffled by conscious effort to create an environment of peace and respect. Elizabeth's appetite diminished further during these final days, but she continued to take small amounts of nourishment when offered. Her physicians and servants prepared light broths and gentle foods that could provide sustenance without causing discomfort. Wine, diluted with water and sometimes warmed with spices, remained a source of comfort and was offered regularly throughout the day. The Queen's voice, while growing softer, retained its clarity and authority when she chose to speak. She used words more sparingly now, as if each utterance carried greater weight and significance. When she did speak, it was often to express gratitude to those who had served her faithfully, to offer comfort to those who were distressed by her condition, or to make final arrangements for the welfare of her realm. Music took on an almost liturgical quality during these final days, with court musicians offering gentle instrumental pieces and soft vocal music that could provide comfort without demanding attention. The sounds drifted through the palace chambers like incense, creating an atmosphere of reverent beauty that seemed appropriate to the solemn yet peaceful nature of the time. The fires in the Queen's chambers burned with steady consistency now, tended by servants who had developed an almost ritual approach to their care. The warmth these fires provided was not just physical, but seemed to represent the continuing presence of life and comfort, even as earthly existence prepared to give way to something beyond mortal understanding. Elizabeth's contemplation of her legacy became more explicit during these final days. She spoke quietly with her closest advisers about the arrangements that had been made for the succession, expressing her satisfaction that the realm would continue under capable leadership. She seemed to find peace in the knowledge that her life's work would endure beyond her own earthly existence. The Queen's spiritual preparation intensified during these final days, with longer periods devoted to prayer and meditation. She found particular comfort in the Book of Common Prayer, whose familiar words and rhythms had provided structure and meaning throughout her life. The Psalms, with their themes of trust in divine providence and hope for eternal peace, seemed to offer special consolation. Physical comfort became increasingly important as the Queen's strength continued to diminish. Additional cushions and warm coverings were provided to ease her rest, and her ladies took particular care to ensure that she was always warm and comfortable. The simplest acts of care, adjusting a pillow, offering a sip of wine, reading aloud from a favorite book, took on profound significance. The weather during these final days seemed to mirror the peaceful transition taking place within the palace walls. March showed its gentler face with mild temperatures and occasional glimpses of sunshine that suggested the approaching renewal of spring. The Queen took pleasure in these natural signs of continuing life and seasonal change, finding in them a reminder of the eternal cycles that govern all existence. Court life gradually simplified as the focus shifted from ceremony and state business to the more fundamental human needs for comfort, dignity, and spiritual preparation. The elaborate protocols and formal structures that usually governed royal existence gave way to a more intimate and personal atmosphere focused on Elizabeth's well being and peace of mind. The Queen's ladies maintained constant attendance during these final days, taking turns to ensure that she was never alone and always had the comfort of familiar, caring presence. They read to her from favorite books, offered gentle conversation when she was inclined to talk, and provided the quiet companionship that brings comfort to all human beings facing life's final transition. Elizabeth's acceptance of her condition became more explicit as these final days progressed. She spoke with quiet dignity about her approaching death, expressing gratitude for the long life she had been granted and the opportunity to serve her people. Her courage and grace in facing mortality provided an example of how a life well lived can approach its end with dignity and peace. The spiritual dimensions of the Queen's preparation became more prominent as earthly concerns gradually receded in importance. She spent increasing time in prayer and meditation, finding in her faith a source of comfort and hope that transcended the physical limitations and discomforts of her declining health. Our contemplative fire continues to glow with steady warmth, its deep red coals pulsing gently with the rhythm of enduring life. The peace it provides mirrors the tranquil acceptance that Elizabeth found as she prepared for her final journey, facing the mystery of death with the same courage and wisdom that had characterized her remarkable life. As we accompany her through these final preparations, we can appreciate the profound dignity with which she approached life's ultimate challenge. Her example reminds us that even the most powerful earthly rulers must ultimately surrender their temporal authority, but that a life lived with purpose and service can face that surrender with grace and hope for what lies beyond. The fire has reached its ultimate state of peaceful repose now, the coals glowing with the deepest warmth, barely visible flames occasionally dancing upward like gentle spirits ascending toward heaven. The light is soft and golden, creating an atmosphere of profound tranquility as we witness the final, most sacred moments of Elizabeth's earthly journey, when the boundaries between sleep and eternity began to blur in the quietest possible way. In the pre-dawn hours of March 24th, 1603, Richmond Palace rested in complete stillness. The Queen lay peacefully in her chamber, surrounded by the soft glow of carefully tended fires and the gentle presence of her most faithful attendants. The atmosphere was one of profound reverence, as if the very walls understood the significance of the transition taking place within their embrace. Elizabeth's breathing had become as gentle and rhythmic as the settling of embers in a well-tended fireplace. Each breath seemed to be offered as a quiet prayer, a peaceful surrender to the natural order that governs all mortal existence. Her face, freed from the elaborate cosmetics and formal expressions required by royal duty, showed the serene calm of someone who had made complete peace with both life and death. The chamber was filled with the softest sounds, the gentle crackling of burning wood, the whispered prayers of those keeping vigil, and the barely audible rustle of fabric as attendants moved with reverential care around their beloved sovereign. These sounds created a sacred symphony that seemed to accompany the Queen's gentle journey toward eternal rest. Lady Catherine Howard, who had served Elizabeth faithfully for over a decade, maintained her position beside the royal bed, offering the comfort of familiar presence during these most intimate moments. Her own breathing seemed to synchronize with that of the Queen, as if she could somehow share the burden of this final passage and ease the transition through the power of devoted friendship. The Archbishop of Canterbury remained nearby, ready to offer spiritual comfort and the last rites of the Church, though Elizabeth seemed to have moved beyond the need for formal, religious observances into a realm of pure spiritual communion. Her faith, which had sustained her throughout her long reign, now enveloped her like a warm cloak, providing comfort and hope as earthly consciousness gradually gave way to something infinitely greater. Dr. John Whitgift's presence brought additional comfort to those maintaining the vigil. His gentle voice, when he spoke at all, offered quiet words of prayer and blessing, creating an atmosphere of sacred peace that transformed the royal chamber into something approaching a holy sanctuary. The boundary between earthly palace and heavenly court seemed to dissolve in the profound stillness of these final hours. The fires in the chamber had been tended with special care throughout the night, their flames providing not just physical warmth, but symbolic representation of the eternal light that awaits all faithful souls. The crackling of burning wood created a gentle rhythm that seemed to measure not just time, but the sacred progression from mortality into eternal rest. Elizabeth's hands, which had once held the scepter of earthly power, now rested peacefully on the fine linen coverlets, their stillness speaking of complete surrender to divine will. The rings that had symbolized her authority and the burdens of rule seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the profound peace that radiated from her entire being. The Queen's face, illuminated by the gentle firelight, showed no signs of struggle or distress. Instead, there was an expression of deep contentment, as if she had finally been granted permission to lay down the enormous responsibilities she had carried for nearly half a century. The weight of crown and kingdom had been lifted, replaced by the lighter burden of simple humanity preparing for its final rest. Those keeping vigil noticed that Elizabeth's breathing gradually became more shallow and peaceful, like someone settling into the deepest and most restorative sleep after a very long and tiring day. There was no apparent discomfort or distress, only the natural progression toward complete rest that comes to all mortal beings at the appointed time. The palace around them seemed to hold its breath in respectful acknowledgement of the sacred transition taking place. Servants moved through distant corridors with even greater quietness than usual, and the normal sounds of palace life were naturally muffled, as if the very building understood the solemnity of the moment and chose to honor it with perfect stillness. As the first hints of dawn began to appear outside the chamber windows, Elizabeth's breathing became even more gentle and peaceful. The transition from sleep to eternal rest was so gradual and serene that those present could barely detect the moment when earthly life gave way to whatever mysteries await beyond mortal existence. The Queen's final breath came as softly as a whisper, as peaceful as the settling of ash in a dying fire. There was no struggle, no apparent discomfort, only the natural conclusion of a life that had been lived with extraordinary purpose and dedication. In those final moments, Elizabeth Tudor ceased to be a monarch and became simply a human soul making the journey that awaits all created beings. The chamber remained in perfect stillness for several minutes after the Queen's passing, as if time itself wanted to honor the magnitude of what had just occurred. The fires continued to burn with the same gentle warmth. The candles flickered with unchanged steadiness, and the very air seemed to hold a quality of sacred peace that spoke of a transition completed with grace and dignity. Lady Catherine Howard and the other attendants remained in silent prayer, offering thanks for the privilege of witnessing such a peaceful passage and asking divine blessing for the soul that had just begun its eternal journey. Their grief was real and deep, but it was tempered by gratitude for having served such a remarkable woman, and by recognition of the profound dignity with which she had faced life's final challenge. The Archbishop offered quiet prayers for the repose of Elizabeth's soul, his words carrying both the formal authority of the Church and the personal warmth of someone who had known and respected the deceased. His presence provided comfort to those beginning to grapple with the reality of their loss, while celebrating the completion of an extraordinary earthly pilgrimage. The fires in the chamber continued to burn with steady warmth, their light now illuminating not the living queen, but the peaceful form of someone who had completed her earthly journey with remarkable grace. The crackling of burning wood continued its gentle rhythm, a reminder that some things endure beyond individual existence, and that the warmth of a well-lived life continues to provide comfort even after the flame of mortality has been extinguished. Our own contemplative fire has reached its final state now, the coals glowing with the deepest possible warmth while requiring no further attention or care. This perfect rest mirrors the profound peace that Elizabeth found at the end of her remarkable journey, the complete stillness that comes when earthly struggles give way to eternal repose. As we conclude our long night of contemplation beside this gentle fire, we can appreciate the extraordinary dignity with which Elizabeth Tudor approached both life and death. Her example reminds us that mortality need not be feared when life has been lived with purpose, service, and faith. The mystery of her final illness may never be completely solved, but the grace with which she faced that mystery provides inspiration for all who must eventually make the same journey from earthly existence into the unknown realm that lies beyond. The warmth of our fire continues to embrace us as we settle into our own peaceful rest, carrying with us the image of a great queen who faced life's ultimate mystery with the same courage and wisdom that had characterized her extraordinary reign. In this gentle warmth, we too can find the peace that comes from contemplating a life well lived and a death faced with dignity and grace. Sleep comes naturally now, as gentle and peaceful as the Queen's own final rest, accompanied by the soft crackling of dying embers and the deep satisfaction that comes from sharing in the contemplation of one of history's most remarkable lives. The fire will continue to glow through the night, providing warmth and comfort as we drift into the restorative rest that heals both body and spirit, carrying us safely through the hours of darkness until morning brings its own gentle awakening. The crackling of the fireplace fades to the softest whisper as sleep claims us, peaceful and complete.